Now we will.
Okay, here we are. Hello, everybody. This is Sarah Colada. And this is a really, really unusual interview that I'm going to have today because my guest today, Nathaniel, is actually someone I know back from my days in Guatemala. And Nate worked with Charlie Rendo, who was an architect that was actually my mentor for a huge part of the deal, helping me build bamboo projects, and basically was just a person that was always going for an advice. And really interesting and inspiring architect. And Nate actually back in the day, and I don't know, that was probably around 10 years ago, Nate, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess so. Yeah, something
Yeah,
like that. Yeah.
exactly. Nate was working with Charlie, um, basically creating furniture and a lot of other really interesting things and designing stuff as well, and some architecture too. And so we kind of worked with similar materials and with the same crowd and also lived at the same place. And then ever since I started to see Nate quite recently, actually, maybe in the last year, online, collaborating with some people in the community of architects that I know and have also been invited as guests to this podcast. So it's like, hey, let's catch up. And so this interview is a catch up for us. And I'm dying to know what happened to Nate ever since and like where he's at today. So Nate, first and foremost, thanks so much for accepting this invitation and deciding to have this sort of more official catch up.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, go on.
hopefully we can get into some of the Guatemala stuff as well later on. It'd be great.
Totally. Actually, exactly. So I did want to start with that. And, I know that you went through quite a few transitions actually ever since I saw you last. And I'm so curious about that journey. And since this podcast is all about entrepreneurship and architecture, I think that it's really fascinating, all the different life paths that you took and where you're at today. But I did want to know a little bit more about Guatemala too. So perhaps we can start by just you telling us a little bit about yourself, and we can get into that through that.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. And thanks for having me on. Yeah, so really, I mean, my passion for architecture really began when I was in college. And it was in the context I'd previously gotten kicked out of school actually after my first semester. And for about 9 months, I worked a bunch of different jobs, from working at a after school program and even doing data entry for a soil science lab. And then it was in that context that I went back to school and I took an introductory course with Lucas Brown in architecture. And that's where everything really started to click for me. And a lot of the issues that I'd been thinking about, both on larger kind of like society issues, but just that also like seeing the day-to-day experience and asking, why are the things the way they are? It really started to make sense through the lens of architecture. And it was kind of like also through studying architecture, you can kind of start to ask those questions too of like, yeah, why are the things the way they are? And why is the built environment the way it is? And sort of like, and then also like, what impact does that have on the environment? And then also, what impact does that have on society and people's lives? And so it's kind of through that thread and that passion of architecture that still kind of carry through to today. And just not only just thinking about it now, but of the role of the built environment and the spaces we create, but also implementing some of the systems and processes and tools that help enable that transformation to take place. So that's kind of like a quick overview of some of those passions and things that I'm still excited about today.
I love that. So back in Guatemala, you were really hands-on building. I remember I always saw you in a workshop, cutting, chopping, nailing things together. So tell me a little bit about that experience and that particular part of your life.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really special time. And to give some context as well in where we were in Guatemala, I mean, this is rural Guatemala, very small towns. The primary language is not Spanish, but local language is Tzutujil or Cachiquel. And so a very different context. But it was through actually building things and working with your hands where you can connect with people in a really nice way. So in college, I'd started to get some building and carpentry skills. But then I'd also worked in Germany for a summer building. It was actually a passive house, and that's where I really learned the carpentry skills. And so when I went to Guatemala, I could use those and just be in the shop, have fun, make things, and build different both products, but also houses. And then kind of connecting back to that piece of why is it the way that we build the way that we do? From that standpoint, it was really interesting because in that context, we could build with bamboo, which is just this absolutely amazing material that you can do a lot with. And so also just experimenting with different types of building systems using bamboo, both referencing like more traditional systems, but then adapting those to the current conditions. So, yeah.
Oh my
And
God, this is so special to me because I honestly have never had a conversation like on all of this, what I do now, which is like this sort of broadcasting and talking about business. I never had a conversation with someone who experienced that back then. And even just the way you described the sort of ways of connecting with what Guatemala is, and especially that rural area, connecting through projects and connecting through building, that was very much so my experience. And it's just such a beautiful way to actually apply your skills as an architect or even early stages a designer into something that is tangible and also makes an impact, or it can be used in some way. And that's beautiful. And I know that back in the day, outside of doing carpentry, you also were working on architecture projects with Charlie. So tell us a little bit about the projects you actually built there.
Yeah, so one of the projects I spent the most time on was the health clinic in San Pablo. And so I also lived there for a little bit as well, and worked on building this health clinic. And so again, it's a rural community, so access to healthcare is about a 3-hour trip by boat, walking, bus. And so access to healthcare is incredibly important. So this was a project that could both provide those services and then also some women's educational support as well, right within the town. And so, yeah, again, like what you said is a really important point. Like we had the product itself, which was this awesome health clinic at the end, but then also the process of building that and working alongside people. We had, different people in the community really like step up and be a project manager for that project and elevate their skills through that project as well, and start to like hone that, basically, run that project sort of elevated their sort of like expertise as well. So that was also really cool to see that it kind of worked on multiple levels. So it was like, okay, we're going to have this clinic, but then also build up skills within the community and continue that training as well.
And there's a lot I want to add to this because I worked with the same builders, and I think that what was really beautiful, specifically in that setting, is that building a natural project, you really had to deal with people that actually, being builders, had more experience or perhaps a lot of exposure to materials such as concrete and steel. And there was this sort of belief in the community that if you build yourself a concrete house or if it's a concrete building, that's like, leveling up your economical status, so to speak, and obviously, following the principles of how America is built. And I think that in these developing countries, a lot of the influences come through mainstream building suppliers as well, and how they train builders and how they provide the materials through price tags and things like that. And so eventually, there was this sort of clash between what's indigenous and the sort of traditional way of building and utilizing nature and clay and earthen buildings and bamboo. But then on the other side, the skills of the community and also their desire to live in concrete. And so what I loved in those projects, especially with Charlie and community projects specifically, is that they were showing a new way of giving, let's just say, a new life to the natural building, sorry for this, natural, like, yeah, new life to the natural building, but also educating the community about the value. And I think that the fact that international people were building on this, like building with the locals, it was showing that we're curious and excited to actually learn those new, those older ways of building and give them a new life. And I think that that was really valuable as an experience at a time. But Nate, what happened with you after that? Tell me about that.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, and you've got your YouTube right now. You also working in tech. You have your own project or business running, and also working for someone else. So there's just so much. And this is today, but we're talking about a 10-year gap. So fill me in a little bit.
Yeah, and just to conclude on some of those comments that you made, which were really spot on, which was it also we had like older population. There was a gap in knowledge because of that as well, and so a lot of the younger carpenters and builders were familiar with using block, but then some of the older population was familiar with this traditional building technology, and so part of that project would actually bring they were part of that project and then also help train like the younger generation as well. And so that was also like a really nice synergy that happened. And then just the added benefit of this type of building was also that it did require more hands. And so you can involve more people in the community and actually just having a build day and people come out and help build the project as well, beyond just like the core carpentry team. So that's also like a really nice component to that. Yeah. So in terms of leaving Guatemala, which was really hard, I really wanted to stay. And, but yeah, ultimately also was, wanted to go back and sort of keep building on some of those skills, but really learn like the world of architecture itself. So previously I really had a lot of this hands-on experience, and then wanted to go back and saw that, okay, I have this opportunity to go back to grad school and study architecture, and continue to work off of a lot of the ideas that we confronted when we were in Guatemala, which is like this really complex situation. It was kind of like this, you had multiple cultures there. And so that had a lot of complexity in terms of what does it mean to actually like benefit the world or provide value or make the world a better place. Those questions definitely started to get complicated, especially once you start working in that realm of community service or in these projects like abroad. You start to ask, okay, like what is really happening here, and what does this really mean? And so going to architecture really helped sort of sort through some of those core questions that I was working through at the time. So studied architecture. I worked at a couple really great architecture firms, and I had the chance to work at both large scale, small scale, both residential, commercial, office buildings, to doing schools and churches. Worked on some really great projects. And then had the opportunity to really focus on sustainability, which was something I was passionate about. And so I worked at Cove Tool for a bit, focusing on sustainability and how to really enable architects to build more sustainably, and then transitioned over to Outer Labs, working as a UX researcher.
And this is super interesting because, and I was like thinking how to name this podcast. And since I remember you always working with products and with your hands and sort of building furniture and all that stuff, I was like, wow, it's interesting that now you're doing also, technological products. I mean, Cove Tool and Ultra Labs are a great example of it. And so I think that it's just a really interesting way of how that transitions and translates into what you're doing. But I wanted to ask you specifically as to, what influenced the transition from working with your hands and working on design into technology, actually, and now even more so like technological apps, because it's really quite a jump. So tell me about that.
Yeah. And certainly I think I'll always be making stuff with my hands, and it's definitely a passion of mine still to tinker and make furniture and that sort of thing. And so it's definitely still like a hobby. And that was definitely something that I missed when I wasn't like working at architecture firms was I did work at some boutique architecture firms that did allow for some experimentation in terms of like how things are built, how things come together, but it's not as common. And so, but yeah, and then in terms of the sort of shift, I mean, for me, it didn't really seem like a shift because I was kind of like always thinking about, again, thinking through like what is that relationship between the built environment and people's lives, and how do we uh, have a positive impact on people's lives through the built environment, whether that's through a product, a physical product, or a digital product. And so I think previously I would have considered buildings and spaces. I probably wouldn't have considered that as products. And it's kind of a controversial view to think of it that way to a certain extent, especially from the architecture standpoint, which is, they won't typically in the architecture practice, you're thinking of, okay, this is a boutique project that I'm working on. It's not a product. But if you sort of expand that view, you can start to think of those in a similar terms and sort of shift the focus to, okay, what value does this actually provide for people? And how are people actually going to use this space or this product in particular? Maybe if it's bringing joy to someone's life or just improving someone's life. And so in that case, it's actually quite similar in terms of both a digital or physical product, in terms of really shifting the focus to the people. And I actually found that in the tech world that there's like this whole industry and world of actually really focusing on that as a significant factor. And something probably that could carry into architecture as well. There's some work in post-occupancy studies, but it is somewhat lacking in terms of, okay, we built this space, but we don't really follow up that much typically in terms of, okay, is this useful? Do people find this practical? Is it good? Is it bad? There's not that much data feedback in terms of the architecture's decision-making process and whether that's good or bad, other than them just saying, oh, I made this beautiful object in space and has these like pretty images, but not so rigorous in terms of like, okay, how do people actually use that space? Is it effective? And that sort of thing. And so that's, I guess, where I see the crossover, just in terms of thinking in terms of product and really of products, and then looking at also the sort of the bigger picture item things and thinking of, okay, how can we pivot certain products, whether it's a physical or a digital one, in strategic ways and really make that impactful and provide a lot of value to people.
I love that. And it's like the way you explain that as the process and a design thinking sort of methodology, it really makes so much sense that that's how you approach any product, and also an architectural product that you would be designing is looking at that practicality and user experience and all that stuff. And I think that's why there's the word architecture applies to technology, and certainly for technological products, it can be used as architecture of the interface, architecture of the user experience, as well as buildings. And it's interesting that more and more so we can find our own skills in design being translated into that sort of technological space. Your passion for technology really led you to start creating content around it for the AEC industry. Tell me a little bit more about that, and like what is the future of that as well as a platform, as your own personal project?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about it. So I'm still very passionate about the architecture industry and still very involved. And so part of that is providing my perspective on the industry, how we can improve the industry in a number of ways, and also providing practical tutorials on how to leverage specific technology that people use. And so, so part of that is doing the tutorials. So I've got a lot of different Rhino tutorials. And then coming up as well, we're doing with two other architects, doing a Tell Me More the podcast is called Tell Me More. And that podcast is really about kind of lifting off the Band-Aid to the architecture industry and letting people in on what it is that architects do, the processes, the stories behind the architecture industry, and also elaborating on, what it takes to build a building. What is it that architects do? Those sort of questions, really share that out to the public in a very public way so that people can start to understand, okay, this is what architects do, beyond maybe some of their understanding of what architecture is, depending on if they are referencing a movie that they've watched in the past, or they just know a little bit from school or something like that. But yeah, so that's some of the inspirations there.
I love that. So your audience actually for the podcast is going to be general public. It's not going to be just the AEC industry.
That's the hope. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's definitely the hope, is to open it up. And so some of our episodes will have, I don't know if you've listened to Car Talk or other shows where people like call in and, they have an issue or something like that. And yeah, so it'd be like answering questions like that as well. And yeah, trying to open up the mysteries of architecture, and unraveling that. And then also, so that's like one component of it, is this more showing that to the general public, or kind of trying to reveal that to the general public. Another one is really about, there's a lot of shifts in technology happening currently. And really, I think making sense of those and what's happening on the ground and how people are thinking about those into the future, keeping a pulse on the different technology projects that are out there and different platforms that are happening, I think will also be beneficial for just the architecture industry in general. Like, a lot of architects are focused on, hey, I need to finish, I have a project deadline next week. And so encouraging some longer term thinking in terms of like strategically positioning your architecture firm to think about a longer view that potentially could incorporate technology, and at a minimum just keeping a pulse on, okay, these are these different technology projects that are happening. What could this mean for my practice? Maybe there's something that is there that sparks an interest and say, oh, hey, I could actually use that for this thing, and that could benefit my process, speed it up, make it so I can have more time to design, or whatever that thing is that they're trying to accomplish.
I love this. And I think, I think that it's a really great idea that you are targeting the general public. I recently had a guest, Scott Henderson, who actually is doing a series called By Design, and it's also geared, it's on TV, and it's geared towards the general public, introducing people into what industrial design is, and like, what sort of efforts are being put into designing products, everyday use products. And, it's really great. And this is something I also discussed with him, as to how important it is to educate the general public about the importance of design, and also our role in this specific case for us as being a role of being an architect. Like, what do we really actually do? And I think that it's been an everlasting sort of pain point for the industry, that our clients don't always realize what is it that we actually do. And sometimes very often we get approached to just create a plan or to help them apply for planning permissions. And it's like, well, that's just part of what we do. But like, we're here as problem solvers, and also to design better functioning spaces and create more beautiful places as well. And it's like, I think that is a general international problem of the industry that we're facing as designers. And I think it's really great that for content creators to come out of the architecture sort of group only and broadcast the meaning of what we do to general public, helping also educate about that, and sort of create layers into an understanding of what our role is, as designers. So I love that. I really am looking forward to it. But I wanted to ask you a little bit more about sort of what's the future holding for you now that you're working, in all these different things, developing your own personal projects, but also working with Outer Labs. Where are you putting your efforts currently, and what you're focusing on?
Yeah, that's a really good point, in terms of like how architects show their value, demonstrate their value. And there is that tendency of like, hey, do this thing, like create these programs. I want you to do this thing, but then saying, no, here, I can provide these, all these different services. So that's a really good point. Yeah. So in terms of, I mean, that's a really good question. I guess we'll have to look back. We'll have to connect in a couple of years again, or I mean, of course, we'll connect before then. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like the items that I'm focusing on now, one of the analogies that I like to use is, which is an overstated analogy, I know, but it works really well for my brain, which is it's similar to a garden. Like when you have a garden, there you have weeds, you have certain plants that you need to just trim and take out in order for other plants to grow more plentiful. And so another way of thinking that is also sort of like gaining a little bit more focus as well. I think in the past, I'm someone who has a lot of passions, and there's like, I want to learn everything and I want to do everything. And like, if you know, I'm going to go now watch that show that you mentioned, that sounds super fascinating. I would love to like study industrial design. I actually had two roommates that had industrial design. They studied industrial design. So I was really inspired by the work that they were doing. And a lot of the things that I work on now, actually, I sort of like will talk to them and kind of use them as a resource as well. But yeah, in terms of like trimming the garden, or yeah, like letting this certain plants grow and sort of gaining focus, I'm really, some of those items now are really around UX research, product strategy, and really honing those skills and improving those. And it's really a whole discipline. There's a reason why it's a discipline. And so really gaining some of those additional skills is something that I'm hoping to continue to hone and get better at. And part of that missing piece too is like learning some of those, like the business acumen as well. So gaining some, at one point I was like, oh, maybe I should go back and do an MBA or something. Probably don't need to do that right now. But at least like taking a course in different business courses would be really interesting. Something that I previously thought I may not be interested in, but something that could be really interesting to continuing education on that front. So yeah,
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that you said that, actually. And you know, I asked you sort of in stages about the different decisions because I knew that you went through a bunch of transitions in your career, basically following those passions and saying yes to your hobbies. But you know, being educated in design and architecture, I think it's sometimes a very heavy thing to go through emotionally, to say, oh, you know, now I'm just going to transition into something completely different to what I've been educated in and leave that career path behind to try something new. So it's not always easy, and it comes together with a certain, you know, sometimes with quite a challenging, so to speak, adaptation. So tell me a little bit more about how that felt for you and how you navigated through these transitions.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because it does take learning new things, and that's definitely a component of making any kind of transition or switch. I think all those different sort of pivots did require a lot of learning new things, yeah, a lot of like just industry jargon, language, terminology, those sort of things. So yeah, on the one hand, you can say, okay, there's this like design system, certain way of thinking. There's like, we can leverage our previous knowledge for new jobs, and we can leverage like architecture education is like incredibly powerful education. You learn a lot, especially in grad school. You can do research papers. There's a lot that you can sort of apply with that as your base. But even with all that said, there is still a learning curve with any sort of transition. So especially when I went into sustainability, even though I had previous, I did my undergrad in basically sustainability. I went to a sustainability school, which was every class that I took had something to do with sustainability, whether I was taking math, economics, English, everything had the title, had a word sustainability in the title of the course, whether that was a good thing or bad thing. But when I, even after going to architecture school, working at architecture firms, then focusing on sustainability, there's like a lot of information to learn, a lot of expertise to sort of unravel. Um, and for better or for worse, I kind of like dive in, and like it's similar to like building things. Like, how do you learn how to build things? You just start building things and putting things together, and then go back, do additional learning, get your hands dirty, and really actually learn through doing, which that's just how I do it.
I love this. And what about like the navigating through the transitions alone? Like, were you ever feeling like perhaps, following a passion to go into technologies, leaving architecture in the traditional path of like what you should be doing as a designer, for example, or where you should apply your skills in order to, I don't know, better your CV, or maybe get a better opportunity at a design job? Sometimes when we transition like this, we're actually walking away from part of a career that we could have had if we just continued that path. So has it ever felt like leaving something behind and going into the unknown? Or was the excitement was so strong that you just didn't mind too much?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think I know that people have that tendency to be timid, or like that's a big jump to like just go and do something else. And but again, in my mind too, that's sort of like leading with fear. And I, if you can lead with like passion and interest, that can sometimes also be a way to like transition into something new, which is just like, hey, this looks like a really awesome opportunity and something that I would really enjoy doing and feel like I can provide value and expertise in that thing. And if there are gaps, then I can learn the necessary things that I need to learn for that given job. And so, yeah, so there is, I personally don't feel like I sort of like left something behind. I really love what I'm doing right now, and also feel very fortunate to also work with really amazing people. We have just like incredible people on our team, an incredible manager, and really people that also came from the AEC industry, but then also came from the tech industry and sort of converged. So can learn a lot from both those disciplines. And so at the moment, feel very fortunate to work with the people that I work with. Just, yeah, incredibly talented people as well as just like really good, solid people. But yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question or not, but maybe we need to circle back to that question.
No, yeah, it does. And I love this because sometimes people attach so much meaning to making decisions like this, and not everyone needs that to be a difficult thing to transition. And so even though I understand what it feels like sometimes to leave what you think you're meant to be doing, especially in architecture, like at school we're taught to behave a certain way throughout our career. And I think that making a massive shift as to moving away from design into technology, for example, can be scary and can feel like maybe I will never have a chance, or at a shot of getting a job in a big design firm if I move away and now work for 2 years in technology. But I think that it's also really exciting to explore other things. And you haven't really ever left architecture. You're still an architect. Same me, even though I don't design currently. It's not really like moving away. It's just kind of choosing things that excite me and make me happy. And and I think that we need more of that. And I love the fact that your answer to it was light. It said I don't want to choose fear. I want to choose, what excites me and where my passion takes me. And I think that's beautiful. That's certainly like a good enough message within that. So thanks so much, Nate, for joining me today. It was really exciting to catch up and also to have this semi-official, official interview as well. If people wanted to like check you out on social media or follow your YouTube, where do they go to find you?
Yeah, so you can just go on my LinkedIn, and there should be a link there to the YouTube channel, which is Nate's Studio Desk. Yeah, so those are the two locations. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions as well about going from architecture into the tech world. And it's really, yeah, so please reach out. I'm really open to talking, discussing. And if you're also interested in joining the Tell Me More podcast, let me know.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks, Nate. And thanks for
Yeah,
everyone listening in. Take care and we'll see you soon.
awesome. Thank you.